Hello, and welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. In each episode, we use a place as a jumping off point for a conversation about music, anywhere from the obvious to the obscure.
Simon, is this Music Map's first visit to the Midlands?
I think it could well be.
So, staying true to our stated claim to explore obscure places, we're not looking at Birmingham or Solihull. We're going to put a pin in the small Warwickshire village of Water Orton.
Somewhere I'd never heard of, to be honest.
Me too. Now, our guest this week is Will Hodgkinson. Will is a journalist, author and broadcaster from London. He is the chief rock and pop critic for the Times newspaper and contributes to many publications, including Mojo and lots of other places. His books include Guitar Man and Song Man, which came out in 2006, 2007, respectively. They're both non-fiction in a comic style, according to Wikipedia. In Guitar Man, Will...
You've done detailed research then.
Hey, look, everyone does it. It's either me or AI. He received lessons and advice from Johnny Marr, Roger McGuinn of the Byrds and PJ Harvey. And similar format, ain't broke, don't fix it, something like that. In Songman, he learned the basics of songwriting with the goal of recording a single at Toe Rag Studios, which you'll remember was hot for a while, because the Strokes or the White Stripes, people like that were...
the White Stripes, I think.
Anyway, this time he got tips from no other... Keith Richards, Andy Partridge of XTC, and folk queen, Shirley Collins.
An impressive list.
Indeed.
There we go.
Today, however, we are focusing on Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence, that was published by 9/8 Books.
Yeah, that's the one.
So, Will, welcome to Music Maps.
Thank you very much.
Now, although this is a music podcast, I expect there will be listeners who don't know who Lawrence is. So, can you start by giving us the elevator pitch, what you tell your mum or your aunt about who Lawrence is?
Lawrence was in a band called Felt from 1980 to 1990, and he saw it as his alternative rock band. So it was going to be a bit like the Velvet Underground, it was going to be in the shadows, but he wanted it to be successful, but it was, the kind of thing that John Peel might play. That was his goal. John Peel never played it, which is the tragedy. He reinvented himself in 1990 with a band called Denim. And the idea with Denim was to do something much more commercial. He wanted it on a major label, and he wanted to revisit his 70s childhood and tie it up with what was going on at the time. So it was really Britpop before Britpop, because Britpop really took off in about 95, 96, and this was 92, 93. So it was ahead of its time. Yeah. But it all went terribly wrong in 1997. He thought he was going to have a hit, and it didn't happen. It was a disaster. Yeah. And his life started going really downhill. He ended up as a drug addict, homeless, and since then he's been picking himself up. He's got a new band called Mozart Estate, who were previously known as Go-Kart Mozart, same band, and he's carrying on at the age of 63 and still trying to become a famous pop star.
So let's just go back a little bit. Our starting point today, as we said, is Water Orton. So what can you tell us about that and Lawrence's early years, because it's quite a significant part of who he is?
It's a massively important subject, and it's something he came back to time and again, unusually so. What happened was he was 7 years old, and they lived on a council estate in Edgbaston, which is in Birmingham, central Birmingham. And he says that he absolutely loved it there, and he wanted to be one of the kids who got the bus to the city centre. He had this idea in his head. He saw all the older kids in school uniform, and he wanted to be one of them. Because, you go to the primary school locally and the comprehensive further away. So then, when he was 7, a little boy on the estate called Derek got stabbed, and he saw him trotting back, with his satchel bouncing on his side, and, blood running down his back. And I said, oh, that must have been a tragedy. And he went, no, Derek was fine, actually. The real tragedy is that we had to move to Water Orton. Yeah. He wasn't worried about Derek. He was very worried about having to move to Water Orton, which was a village. It's like you could call it a suburb, you could call it a village. I've been there a couple of times because of doing the book. It's very normal. It's got a green, it's got, the primary school's on the green, it's got a little library, it's got some nice houses, it's got some cheaper houses. It's like a very, very normal British village. And what Lawrence said about it was that it was incredibly boring, and that's when his imagination went into overdrive. His parents lived in a little cottage which he hated because he said it was really messy, and he hates mess. Cost something like £7 a week. The rent was next to nothing. This is, bear in mind, this would be the late 60s.
Is that the one he describes as the worst house in the village?
Yeah, I mean, I've been there. I didn't think it was that bad, but he said it was the worst house in the village. He said it was absolutely terrible. And he said the main thing is the imagination thing, because two things happened. One is that on the other side of Water Orton, on the other side of this bridge, which goes over the motorway, which was actually built for farmers to take their cows across, was one of the biggest and most notorious estates in Britain, Chelmsley Wood.
Right.
And one day when he was a kid, the skinheads came over marauding, and I think all they did was they went on the village green and
Oh no, I read that. It reminded me of the Warriors.
Yeah,
I'm with Lawrence on
the
this
Warriors.
one.
It was the gang. So he thought that's going to happen it never happened again, but he was convinced that the marauders were going to come and attack him, and it was surrounded by woods. So he went in and he imagined ghosts and bats, and he got absolutely terrified. So it was the point at which he started living in his mind, as opposed to on the estate. I think he was a happy little kid because there were always kids around. And he said he didn't relate to anyone anymore. Everyone, as they became teenagers, they wanted to go to the pub, and he didn't like that. So he felt like an outsider. And in his mind, I'm not saying this is right, but in his mind, he was an insider on the estate, and he was an outsider when he went to suburban Birmingham.
Now, around this time, perhaps salvation may be too strong a word, but like many kids, pop music becomes a huge thing, beginning with Mark Bolan. But with punk, it's actually New York's television that really seems to have captured his imagination. What was it about them rather than, say, the Pistols and the Clash?
It started off with the image, and Lawrence is a very image-based guy. He saw a review in the NME which was on the cover, and he was very interested that a cover could be a review. That's unusual. It's by Nick Kent, who's one of the great journalists of his time. And he saw it, and he was intrigued by the way it was written. He thought it was fantastically written. He loved the picture of the band. He was fascinated by them. And then he bought Marquee Moon, and he thought it was the greatest thing ever. Now, what then happened, which is very important, is he met this guy in the village called Maurice Deebank. And Maurice Deebank was a classical guitar virtuoso. He hated punk. He thought it was stupid and amateurish. He had no interest in television. But by chance, if you listen to that television album, it's very virtuoso guitar playing on it. Yeah. That's all going on. The two, Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd doing that twin guitar interplay. And, Maurice Deebank was good enough to do something similar, where you just kind of those cascades of notes, constantly changing. So that's really where Felt started. He had that single, Index, but once he met Maurice Deebank, he realised there was something special here. And Lawrence is a guy who is very good at finding other people and getting them to do things for him. So he's very, very good at, as I've discovered, but he's very good at seeing what people are good at.
It's a good quality to have.
Yeah, and bringing it into his own world, yeah.
When did you first meet Lawrence?
I first met Lawrence 20 years ago. So it was actually during the days of Songman. At the time, I was doing stuff for The Guardian, and I did a thing called Home Entertainment, which is where I'd go around to someone's house and look through their records. Then everyone had videos and DVDs. So it was a way of getting a sense of their tastes and their lives, and people loved doing it. I got a lot of very well-known people doing it. Lawrence wasn't well-known, but and at the time, he was really not known. He'd really been forgotten. But I remembered him from the Denim days, and I knew Felt a bit. I was a little bit too young for them, but I remember, seeing them around in other people's record collections. So I was intrigued. I went around to this very, very seedy little flat in Victoria, and he was living in very odd circumstances because it was horrible. But then he had all his records in perfect order. I remember he didn't want me to. I was going to take one of the records out, just the sleeve, not take the vinyl out. And he went, and he made me don these kind of little surgical gloves before I was allowed to touch it because he couldn't bear the thought of fingerprints. So I was intrigued. That was 20 years ago. Stayed in touch. After that, he went through the really bad times of being homeless in a hostel, everything. But we were always friendly. And then the idea for the book came about really recently. I mean, the book idea probably started in 2023, I think. No, that can't be right. It must have been late 2022, and then we spent 2023 together, because we're only in 2024 now.
And, I mean, the title, tells us exactly what it is. This is you spend a year essentially following Lawrence around in his company, and that's the structure of the book. And through that, we, the reader, discover, well, all the biographical details, everything one would want to find out about somebody in a book. And it's pleasing to see, obviously, it's been a huge critical success this year.
Not expected. I'm really not saying that with false modesty, because Lawrence was very unknown, and the idea was pitched. It wasn't an easy pitch to get through. Pete Selby, who's the publisher at 9/8, wanted to do it, but he had to convince other people who'd never heard of him. Yeah. And they were saying, "Who is this Lawrence guy? Lawrence of Arabia." They didn't know who he was.
A lot of the better books the last few years, though, are coming from that angle. Reach for the Stars was another they published that didn't really focus on famous people in some sections, but ended up being extremely engaging without.
But at least all of those people in that book had,
they'd had hits,
massive success.
Some had, some haven't.
Yes, some had, some haven't. But he never has. And this is the interesting thing with Lawrence, is that I felt there was something to be told here, because this was someone who, in his mind, was writing hits. He wasn't writing obscure songs that he wanted, 5 people to listen to on Six Music. He wanted these songs to be big hits. And that was the interesting thing. So it was like this kind of strange delusion.
So what I found interesting, and I learned from the book, is Lawrence, like many, is inspired by punk rock. And he puts out, in that DIY spirit, his first single. And that's a success in the small pond in which he's choosing to operate. Tell us a little bit more about that. The first felt record.
That was called Index. He made that by himself. He did it in his bedroom when he was a teenager. He got a tape recorder and he pressed record and just kind of strummed a guitar and then made some indecipherable noises. And he said the idea with Index wasn't to make a good record, it was actually to make a very bad record. He just wanted to make a record. It didn't matter what it was. He had seen at the back of the NME an advert said, "Press your own record," and he'd discovered bands like Subway Sect and Buzzcocks and all these early punk bands who did exactly that. So he was really intrigued and wanted to do it himself, but this is a suburban kid, and on the outskirts of Birmingham, and growing up in Water Orton, really a village. So he didn't really know what to do, and he sent this tape off to the address that was on the back of the, on the advert, and he got a letter back saying, are you sure you want to do this? You normally have something called a master tape. You don't just have a TDK C90 cassette, which the older listeners will remember. So he said, yeah, sure. I mean, I got a Memorex. That was the most expensive one in Boots, So
pro attitude.
He went for a brand name. He didn't go for the Boots own.
He didn't go for Boots own brand. So he went for it, and that was the funny thing is that it got single of the week in sounds, and from that he got Felt got a backing, a support tour with The Fall, which is a very big deal. So he hit the ground running, but then Felt after that were kind of, I don't think they were huge. I think they were critically, people they got good reviews. I don't think they were ever a big band.
No.
I think they were successful as an indie band.
Yeah.
They would play maybe the Electric Ballroom or Dingwalls. These are venues, well, they're still around actually, but, venues up and down the country where you might get a few hundred people. They're a cool band.
Was that their aim, though, to be NME, John Peel? That was the intention?
That was the intention. It was the intention of Felt, and then after that, it was the intention to be a pop star. And so initially with Denim, I think he alienated a lot of the indie fans, because there's a whole thing about indie where it's about kind of underachieving. Everything's underplayed. You act like the Velvet Underground, and you stay cool. You don't.
As soon as someone gets popular, they all say they hate them.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the classic one he said was, I would never go on the 6 o'clock news. Not that they ever asked me, but if they did, I had my rejection prepared.
Can you tell us about some of the rules that Lawrence enforces while in Felt?
In Felt, he had all kinds of rules. I mean, one of the rules was that they all had to wear special shoes that were a certain type of DM. They're thin-soled DMs. And I think they're called lattice toed, or the top had a sort of lattice, and he made them buy them from a shop called Robot in London. You got to remember, these are guys, one of them's working, like doing an apprenticeship at British Leyland. They're working class guys. They're not like fashion kids.
Yeah.
He was the only fashion kid.
So King's Road for clothes isn't really on the list.
It's not on the list, and so for example, he sacked his first drummer for having curly hair. And I remember saying to him, because I've got curly hair, and I said, what have you got against people with curly hair? He said, I love curly hair, just not on drummers in felt. Not even drummers is okay, because the guy from television had curly hair. Strange rules. He wanted them to not drink. This was a big, big rule, and this was one that was impossible. He said, well, we're not going to drink like normal bands. We're going to go abroad. We're going to go to, I think they went to Denmark. And he said, we're going to go and see art galleries, and we're going to wander around and we're going to discuss works of literature. And they go, what are you on about?
So he's trying to prescribe...
all the time, and it went wrong from the start. So it was like he had this vision, and this is something which I really saw with Lawrence throughout, including our time together. He has visions for things, and he gets very, very frustrated when that vision isn't possible, because it's a kind of perfectionism, but it's an unreal perfectionism. It's not like some perfectionists say, OK, fine, I know it can't be perfect, but I'd like it to be.
Yeah. Wasn't there a rule where he could check people's bags? He could check the contents of bags?
It was the bag itself. He wanted a certain type of bag, yeah.
Certain kind of bag.
Certain type of bag.
Certain kind of plectrum.
Yes, and yeah.
Only white plectrums, I think.
I think that's right. And then Maurice Deebank, he said no sunburst finishes, guitar and sunburst finish. And his sister bought him a sunburst finish.
And rectangular guitar cases only.
All this kind of stuff, yeah, just rules.
Was the 10 albums in 10 years, was that always the aim, or did that become a thing?
Well, that's something which is, you might have been mythologised over the years. All I can say is there are 10 albums in 10 years. That is the reality. Yeah. So it does exist. Whether or not he planned it, I think it's hard to say.
I think Tony Wilson would have called that praxis, wouldn't he?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's quite a lot of that. But that's how bands are formed, and that's how bands are interesting. Yeah. And that's something else about Lawrence which really fascinated me, is that he always thinks about. It's like he's in a movie, and the camera is always on him. So anything that's happening to him, he's thinking about it, how it will look. And that makes it very interesting, because it's like, 10 albums in 10 years, great story. It's almost, he thinks a bit like a music journalist. He thinks in that way, rather than just a musician letting it all happen.
Did he want the former members involved in the book at all?
That was a big one. So he didn't want the former members involved in the book. And
also didn't want any anecdotes telling.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous, obviously. I mean, the way I did it, and, as people will find out when they read it, is that any time he told me a rule, I put the rule in the book and then broke it.
Immediately. I mean, that was very funny.
Yeah.
There's
an anecdote following the no anecdote rule.
Exactly.
Now, he seems to say he doesn't want an anecdote and then tells an anecdote in the same sentence.
Oh, he didn't tell it. I told it because that anecdote came from Douglas Hart of the Jesus and Mary chain.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it was.
Yeah. So So he didn't want the former members involved.
He didn't. Now there's various reasons for that. One of them is that he's fallen out with a lot of people. Bands do fall out with each other, but Lawrence is a singular guy, and it's difficult to maintain relations with him when you're working with him. Not when you're just doing stuff with him. He's very friendly, but it's very, very controlling. So there's that. I had to make a decision, and the decision I made was to go along with it, because I felt, in the end, that what Lawrence, I found being in his company, my observation of him, I felt was enough. I didn't feel the need to back it up with various accounts. It's not a memoir in the normal sense at all. It doesn't have that structure. So I felt, you know what? Lawrence is the most interesting guy here. The things he says, true or not, the way he sees things is very, very interesting. And I was thinking, the one guy I would have liked to have talked to is Maurice Deebank. The other great talent was Martin Duffy, but Martin Duffy had died before I started. And then lots and lots of people came and went. There were people who were friends of his, like Nick Gilbert was a guy in Felt who's good friends of his for a long time. But I just decided, Gary Ainge, that was another one. I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to base it on this immediate year we spent together, this observation it's not, like I said, it's not a memoir. It's really about someone existing in the world now and how they exist in the world when the dream they had hasn't come true, but they haven't given up and they're still operating in this strange way, which is not like most people.
But we're going to jump around a little bit, I think. So one of the people Lawrence most admires from punk, we admire too, is Vic Goddard of the pioneering punk band Subway Sect. Now, one of the chapters in the book tells of a visit to see Vic in his West London home. Could you share for our listeners a little bit more about that relationship and that visit without giving too much away?
Well, that was really interesting because here was Lawrence's hero, and he was leading such a completely different life, even though there are comparisons in their kind of, iconoclasts who had this vision and they're kind of obscure, although Subway Sect had a hit with Ambition, but, neither of them are big. But Vic actually had a totally different approach to life. So the first thing he was doing was looking after his 102-year-old father. Yeah. But he said, there's just no way. I'm too he knew that he's too selfish to do that. And Vic had a completely different attitude. And so, whereas with Lawrence, he thinks that everything he's done is absolutely the best song ever written. Doesn't matter what it is. He says it's a masterpiece. Vic was the opposite. You'd say, Lawrence would be pouring all these accolades at him, saying, there's a song he liked called "Give Up the Money," for example, and he was saying, for my money, it's one of the best songs ever written. And Vic would go, oh, it's all right. And, Ambition is such a brilliant song. And he said, yeah, it was just a big disappointment. It was just about how we weren't making it. And he was complete opposite. He wasn't, he, again, is someone who does it himself. He's DIY and he kind of operates this stuff. But he does not, he did not have the same attitude as Lawrence. And in a way, he was a bit more embedded in normal life. I mean, he'd been married, his wife had died. But, he'd been married for a long time. There he was with Harry, who had, got his telegram from the Queen, was bedridden, and we came in, and Harry, who looked absolutely ancient, he pointed this very, very bony finger at Lawrence and went, I know you, you're in that terrible band.
So, I mean, the book is wonderful. That was one chapter that stuck out for me for some reason.
Just bringing it forward a little bit, you accompany Lawrence to Glastonbury, a place where he's perhaps not particularly well suited. What happened on this trip to Glastonbury?
Well, Glastonbury was remarkable. It was pretty much halfway through. Well, it's halfway through the book. It's halfway through the year, and I thought, oh, what's it going to be like? This is going to be really hard work. And my wife said, it's not because I'm the music critic for the Times. Glastonbury is my busiest week of the year. I have to work really, really hard, and we're thinking, what's it going to be like to have to deal with Lawrence? And she said, you shouldn't have to deal with it, because the first thing he did was say, well, you're going to have to sort out a house for me. And I was like,
that's easily done, isn't it, Glastonbury?
I don't know if there's that many. He said, well, I'll pay...
There must be loads of available houses.
Loads of available houses. He said, I've got a budget of 0. It'd be good if the band could stay there too. A cottage would be nice. And incredibly, this is the remarkable bit, I did find him a house. I actually did. I've met these lovely posh people who had a house nearby. I said, yes, of course we'll have him. And
you could consider a career change into estate agent.
Exactly. And anyway, I'll let the readers find out what happened there, but it didn't end well. Glastonbury was fascinating as well, because here was this guy who, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that Lawrence was really talented. I really do think he's a great, great songwriter. I think he's a bit like Lou Reed. Who else comes to mind? I mean, maybe John Lydon to an extent, but there's such evocation of these different worlds. And he was playing at this, you think, oh, Mozart stayed. They've had quite a bit of attention. Maybe they'll get a good crowd. It's this tiny little kind of hippie stage called the Bimble Inn, and there are like a handful of kids on the floor who, it's in the middle of the afternoon, and the kids just hadn't left yet. They were just like playing games of Jenga or whatever. And there were a few old dreadlocked hippies who had 0 interest, and then a handful of Mozart Estate superfans, and I do mean a handful, I mean about 10.
Right.
And Lawrence and Mozart Estate did this brilliant gig, and I was thinking, what is going on?
Yeah.
Why isn't this getting out there?
Yeah. Why isn't this on a bigger stage?
Why isn't it on a bigger stage? I'm not saying it has to be hits, but, I saw a hell of a lot of Glastonbury, and you know, Mozart State are a really good band now. It's not like amateurish and all over the place. They're really good. He's got really good musicians. And I was just thinking, why aren't, you know, people like it, the people who are there, why doesn't anyone know?
Some bands just don't sort of catch fire. And
yeah, I think
some do.
I think there's more to it than that, though, because with Lawrence it was so hard. It's so hard to get things going because he's got such a. He'll say that he wants the world, but it's so reticent in actually touring, and you know, it's almost like he knows his limitations and he self-limits himself, even in the face of his own vaunted ambitions.
I do often wonder about that. One of my favourite bands, Teenage Fan Club, and I hear their huge choruses and I just think they should be massive. You know? They should be huge. They've got all these really catchy songs.
But they're bigger.
Yeah,
you know, they are bigger. And
there were a lot of bands in the 90s much bigger who were far worse. And I kind of have always been slightly baffled. I'm like, how come they didn't get huge? Because they had loads of really catchy songs. But sometimes it just doesn't happen.
No, and then the thing is with Lawrence, he's often out of time with the world.
Right.
You know, so now, funnily enough, and this is really strange, I mean, Primitive Painters, I mean, it's got 3 or 4 million
Listeners.
streams. That's not bad.
That's quite a lot, yeah.
That's quite a lot, isn't it? You know, that's only happened recently. I think since the book has been out. You know,
it's those 10 people from Glastonbury
playing
it every day.
He does get obsessive fans, but he does. But there's just, you know, there aren't that many of them, and you know, I feel there's a great talent there. I feel that he should be better known, and I feel that he's becoming better known because the book is doing well. But my fear with Lawrence is, what's he going to do? Is he going to cancel gigs? How far is he going to take it? You know.
Were there any topics off limits?
Yes.
Generally?
Yes. Yes and no.
So it feels like some of the things that come up in conversation are not.
There were things that
typically things people talk about.
Oh God, no. I mean, I would talk about anything like that. I mean, you know, we'd talk about his tendency to pee in the open because he's scared of urinals. He'd be more than happy to talk about that. I mean, you're not going to get that from anyone. From anyone, yeah, from Madonna or whatever, yeah, squatting in the corner. No, he's very happy to talk about that kind of stuff. There were 2 main rules. I think the main rule was I agreed to call him Lawrence. I mean, like everyone, he somewhere along the line there was a family name. It disappeared about 30, 40 years ago. If people can find out if they want to, but to me, he's Lawrence. I think that was fair enough. I think there's a couple of things he objected to when he read it. We had a lot of fights. I mean, that's inevitable. But, you know, generally, once he really read it, at first he freaked out, but once he really read it, he realised that there's a lot of affection there.
Did you try to enforce rules again for the
all the way, yeah, all the way. But I mean,
are any of them enforceable or not?
No, not really. No. I mean, he wanted to get rid of the word "just," and I said, "Why?" He said, "I just don't like it." Well, you know, I'm not obviously.
Was there a particular kind of dust jacket that was requested?
Zero dust jacket was requested until
no dust jacket.
Yeah, until he wanted a dust jacket. So you know, these rules you have to take with a pinch of salt as well, because they can change all the time.
This question actually comes from James Skelly, singer of the Coral.
Oh, James Skelly, yeah.
I asked him what he would ask you.
Now we have a guest question,
yes,
Will, which is a new.
I haven't told him we're doing this, so we'll check if he listens.
I've been thinking about this though, of trying to get some guest questions.
We were talking on WhatsApp at the weekend, and I said, "What would you ask about this book?" And he sent me this.
So James Skelly, best known for being from the Coral, that band, the Coral.
Yeah, he's been very supportive of the book. I think
he loves it.
Yeah.
He absolutely loves it.
But he asked, was the finished book close to your preconceived conception, or did you assemble the material and let that lead to what the book ended up being?
Latter, but I had some ideas in the beginning. Yeah. So I always knew that it wasn't going to be a memoir. Yeah. I always knew that. I always knew that I wanted to structure it around these walks, because that's what Lawrence did. And fairly quickly, I knew that the structure was going to be quite odd. You know, that it wasn't going to hang together in the usual way. Was this going to work? So I just did it. And I was thinking, this is quite a strange book. It might not work. You know, people may not like it. I'm not talking... I was pleased with the writing. I knew that the writing was sharp, but I was worried about whether anyone's going to think, why is this book starting? You know, why don't we start with his birth? Why do we hear about his birth in chapter 10? Or, do you know what I mean? You know, that kind of stuff. But I felt there's a natural...
You don't need to do a traditional biography for this topic.
No.
There's so many of them out there.
Didn't need it. Didn't need it. Yeah, this is something else.
Would Lawrence pose for a selfie if requested?
No. He doesn't like it, but he does like having his photograph taken. He loves having his photograph taken, but not in ways that, you know, just the selfie, the modern way.
Yeah.
He's very, very at odds with the modern world. He doesn't connect to the internet. He has an old Nokia phone which can send him through
my
text.
dad, you know, he's not connected to anything either.
Well, I mean,
entirely disconnected.
It's very common with
Completely analog.
People a lot older. Yeah, my parents-in-law are the same. But he does like having his photograph taken. If he's got a you know, a proper photographer. He loves a professional photographer.
Right,
He just doesn't like people snapping him with selfies and then sticking it on the internet. That's the thing he gets upset about. And I've had some battles with him about that. You know, sometimes he's been upset with me for not taking photos, but like someone else has taken a photo and I've retweeted, "What do you do that for?" You know, that kind of thing.
What about the fashions of Lawrence? There's some interesting clothes.
He's very fashion conscious. He now calls his current look Westwood Chav, which is a mix of clothes from Lidl and Poundland. I don't know, Poundland don't do clothes. Lidl and Primark and designer clothes when he can afford them or when he can blag them or however else he gets hold of them. He felt it was all about tiny little details. It was all being very smart and, you know, very subtle. So it'd be button-down shirts and certain types of shoes and the trousers had to be short hair and, you know, the whole look was like that. Denim was going into a kind of 70s parody, I suppose, you know, a kind of strange satin jackets and what he imagined, like, the suite to wear. He's got so many details. He said once to me that he wanted to look like the suite when they're not on stage, but they're tour wear. You know, when they're on tour, but they're not on stage. You know, like the
travel wear.
Travel wear, yeah. He's always got a baseball cap, which he's had for donkey's years and could do with a clean. He tends to have these dark denim jeans, shoes, which are called yogi shoes, which is these suede shoes that he likes, which are sort of wide, sort of slightly like desert boots. A very big oversized coat, and lots of layers, and then a bag. When we were together, he had a 1970s W.H. Smith's reuse carrier bag, you know, a kind of multi-purpose carrier bag. I don't he might have moved on since then, but yeah, he's very much fixated on certain things, and that's what he has to have.
And he is the owner of a Greg's baseball jacket, which I was very impressed by.
Yes, I think he is. He's very much into
Greg's underwear. I didn't even know such a thing.
Greg's socks, Greg's underwear.
Existed.
Well, I said to him, you know, he said, "I want to go in full Greg's," and I said, "Even the underwear on stage." He went, "Of course, the fans would expect nothing less." You know, so he does. The details are very important to him. He likes, he likes branded wear from mainstream low-cost outlets like Greg's and Lidl.
How does Lawrence feel about the following foods? Cheese.
Terrified of it.
Olives.
Never had one.
Vegetables.
Opposed. On the whole.
What about licorice?
Loves it. But certain brands.
Yeah.
Got to be the right brand. Drop fruit duos, that's his favourite.
Tell us about the marble sculpture of Lawrence's head that was commissioned.
The book was really structured. The thing about the book was it started with Lawrence's album, the Mozart Estate album, coming out to nothing. It came out in January 2023 and no one cared. It was a great album. And, he was thinking, what's going on? Why isn't it breaking through? So the idea was this year of activity. So lots of things were going to happen. And in that year, a sculptor called Corin Johnson had been working on this giant marble bust. Corin Johnson's a very successful sculptor. He's got sculptures in Westminster Cathedral. He made all of the Nick Cave figurines that Nick Cave's been making of the devil. That was actually Corin who, actually put them together as Nick Cave's ideas. He had this idea of working with this vast chunk of orange marble that he had got hold of to make a Lawrence sculpture. And he wanted to do it because he felt there's something monastic about Lawrence, something heroic in a way. It was almost like a saint or, a kind of martyred saint. There's that kind of sort of tragic aspect to him that he wanted to capture, and it's absolutely brilliant. So part of I came in when the sculpture was in its final stages, but part of the book's travails, so to speak, was finding a home for this giant head. We wanted to present it, and nobody wanted it. We tried in all these different places. Finally, we found somewhere before the year was out, thank God. But that was all very important, because, again, you know, it was this strange thing that Lawrence was in. He was obscure, he had no money, and yet he's having marble heads made of him. Paul Kelly made a documentary of him. I'm following him around. You know, I mean, it's like, for somebody who has had no success, people are fascinated. He had a lot of success.
There was some merchandise, I think, discussed candles and action figures and things.
Lawrence wanted action figures. He wanted the kind of thing that, like a sort of stunt action figure. And we had to explain to him, kids aren't really going to go for this. You know, it's just not going to be up there with Superman.
Quite a lot of figures now are just aimed at adults.
Yeah, but I know.
Marketed towards adults.
That's true, but I don't think even they're going to be limited.
Each or something.
But that was the thought. So eventually, what happens? Corrin made a few kind of smaller busts. They're still pretty expensive, you know, made out of marble. But the original one was sold, and a guy called Jim Lambie bought it, and it's now in Scotland.
Just touching on Denim, did Lawrence view that as maybe his big chance?
Completely. It was major label. It was going to be a big hit. There's a single called Summer Smash, which was going to be... it's not actually that good. There's much better Denim songs, but it was aimed at being a Radio 1 hit, and it was Radio 1 Single of the Week. Everything was going well. And this is in the days of physical releases, of course. Actually, CD singles, if you remember them.
I had many of them.
Yeah, so it was all going to do well. And then on the Sunday before release, Lady Diana died.
So this is the summer of '97.
Summer of '97, and this is a song called Summer Smash.
Yeah.
So not only did they not release it, they melted down pretty much every last copy. There's a handful that are out there, and if you've got one, it's worth quite a lot of money.
Right.
But yeah, that was when he really collapsed. So it was because that was his big moment, and he thought, "This is it. I'm going to be a pop star."
I mean, prior to that, they toured with Pulp and had, so it was building somewhere.
It's building, yeah. I think Lawrence didn't want to play live. You know, again, it's one of these crazy rules, and this is the frustration which has happened all his career, making these self-limiting rules, which he thinks is kind of cool, but actually stops him from being successful. So with Felt, it was all hiding in the shadows, you know, never doing any, you know, he did do interviews, but never like, you know, always being kind of underground and mysterious. With Denim, it was like, well, we're not playing live. Well, you've got to play live. This was the golden age of bands.
Yeah.
The Stone Roses have become the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And they made a fortune from touring. And, of course, you know, he realised his mistake afterwards. But it was all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, Denim was the moment. It was really, really, really damaging for him that the whole thing fell apart.
Has that complete lack of compromise, which is quite a consistent theme, do you think overall that's been more of an advantage or a hindrance?
I think it's been a hindrance commercially. It's been an advantage in terms of artistic purity.
Yeah.
What's the value of things? What do we know? You know, is the value of things to become a millionaire? Is the value of things to make an album which is exactly how you want it, even if 10 people buy it? It's very, very hard to say. Lawrence wants success. He's always said that. He said, I don't want to be a cult star. I don't want to be obscure. He's always said that. But something within him means that he can't let it go unless it's exactly how he wants. That's why we had a lot of battles with the book. You know, we'd have big fights because I'd have to say, but sorry, Lawrence, but it's my book. I'm writing it.
Yeah.
You're the subject. Eventually, I remember one time he said to me, I just want 20%. You have 80% of the book. I have 20%. I was like, 20% of what? You didn't write 20% of it. He wanted 20% of the control, I think. You know, and certain things I let him get on with, and he was brilliant. So I let him get on with the cover. And I loved the cover.
Yeah.
But that was him.
Very striking.
Very striking, but it was his idea to have a picture of him now. Everyone else said, if you get any normal rock star, anyone, they'll have a photograph of them at their prime. Anyone. You know, from Bruce Springsteen to Cher, to Bobby Gillespie, to the Jesus and Mary chain. I'm just mentioning people who've had books out recently.
Usually.
Yeah, and there's a picture of Lawrence looking really strange and striking. And his, you know, that photograph was taken recently. Yeah, maybe a year or two before the book came out. But, you know, he's looking craggy and quite scary, but intense. Like there's a deep interior sadness and suffering, but also a determination. And it just says so much. And so, you know, for all the battles I've had with Lawrence, I also really admire him because I do think he's got amazing judgment of his own logic.
There are some unusual places visited on these walks that you go on over the course of the year. Waltham Cross, Beckenham, Welling, some quite obscure towns. Do the reactions to Lawrence vary from the suburbs to the cities, or
very much so, very much so. In the city centre, he can walk along unimpeded, but then if we go into a shop like Benetton, the security guard will be right on us because they think he's a begging street junkie.
Because in London, you can walk down the street doing. I always say to people, you can do almost anything.
Yeah, you can be invisible, but
in the small towns where I'm from in the northeast,
different.
You'd get heckled immediately.
Well, we did get heckled. We got heckled in Welling, but then in Waltham Cross, for example, which is quite a poor town, they were very accepting of us. You know, we're going around the market, and markets traditionally, there's a snobbery around markets in working class culture. When that's for the poorer people. You know, if you've got more money, you go to the department store. And the people on the markets were really friendly and really nice. And Lawrence used to work on the markets as a kid. His dad was a market trader. So that was really, really nice. And then we'd go to places like, went to this amazing place, what's it? I've forgotten what it's called. It was near Orpington, and it was where he wants to live when he wins the millions, the Euro millions from the lottery. Chelsfield. And that was the place. It was so rich. You don't see people at all because they're all just behind the massive houses and like giant gates with enormous 4x4s in the lane and everything. And we just thought, they're watching us. We're walking along. The curtains are twitching. They've got to be.
They spot you a mile off.
They've got to be. That. We're just wandering about. So that was interesting.
But why do you think he kept taking you back to the suburbs? I found this the most interesting point of the whole thing.
The suburbs is how he's trying to make sense.
Because he ran away from the suburbs.
He ran away from the suburbs, but the suburbs is embedded in him. Yeah, and it's embedded in him. He's trying to make sense. He's trying to recreate the boring suburb he grew up in, and he's trying to make sense of it to understand himself. Maybe subconsciously. You know, he's going back to these places. He's got a fascination. I think there's a songwriting fascination where the boredom inspires the creativity. And now, at the age he's at, he's looking at these places and he's looking at little details, like plastic framed windows, which he hates. He's got a thing about them. He's looking at these details and they inspire his mind. So it's really, really interesting. We'd go to Beckenham initially because David Bowie lived there and we're going to soak up his energy. But very quickly, we're in a reasonably wealthy suburb of London, in Kent, actually, Beckenham. And, it's kind of interesting to see the reactions we get depending on where we go. And you feel that he's kind of putting himself into these situations. It's not exactly willingly or, kind of self-consciously, but you do feel that he knows that he doesn't fit in. And through that, he's creating a kind of energy that then inspires him.
What level of fame do you think may have ultimately been desired?
Well, it depends on what he says and what I think is the reality. He'll say he wants to be incredibly famous and he wants to live in a bubble of money and fame and have a chauffeur.
The original intention of Felt was NME, John Peel.
Yeah, that was then. And then, he wanted to be, he said...
The ambitions have grown.
Yeah, famous in an alternative world. But but I don't really believe him because I think when he comes across things that happen in fame, like people putting up photographs that you don't like, he freaks out. Now, famous people, anyone can become famous if they really want now. You know what I mean? You can dedicate yourself to Instagram influencers. That's what they do, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not no one particular talent. It's just putting yourself out there.
It's not necessarily linked to talent at all.
No. But and he doesn't do any of that, which he could do. So ultimately, I think his idea of fame is embedded in his childhood idea of fame, of seeing Steve McQueen on the television or Terence Stamp. He loved Terence Stamp and Mark Bolan as the pop star. These people, he imagining himself like them. He's not really imagining himself like modern pop stars or modern famous people.
Yeah.
But he loves them. He loves reality TV and The Only Way is Essex and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Will the long-lusted after huge hit ever materialise?
I really think the most likely thing that's going to happen is that one of the really good old Felt songs is going to be used in a film and it's going to take off.
Agree, yeah.
So I think Primitive Painters or Sunlight Bathed the Golden Glow, or one of those very beautiful songs, could be used in a big movie and suddenly everyone's going, what is this? Not on the level of Kate Bush, Stranger Things, Running Up That Hill, but that kind of thing. The modern songs are kind of jokey and novelty-ish and funny, and I like them a lot, but I don't think they're particularly palatable for mainstream taste. But I think the beauty of those old songs, now things are very different now. You know, an old song can take off because of the way music is consumed. And so I think some of those old songs could definitely make
A lot
it.
of the shoegaze bands have found significant success with younger fans recently. And
Yeah, well, Slowdive are massive now.
yeah.
They
I
used
went to
be...
see Slowdive last year, and half the crowd was young,
Yeah, it's amazing.
which caught me off guard to an extent. Right, Mark. True or not? You decide. Lawrence once spent half an hour following Bananarama around Liverpool without daring say anything.
Well, it sounds very Lawrence, that. I don't recall reading that in the book, I must admit.
I think it's in the book.
Is it? Okay. It's been a while since I've read that from cover to cover. Of course, I was one of the very first people to acknowledge the quality of this book.
6 months ago you first read it.
I've got the tweet to back that up. May it was. I was lucky enough to get the proof. Anyway, yes, then. I'm saying yes. Bananarama.
True, yes. Lawrence once had a personal joint roller on the payroll, £50 a week.
Now, I'm still confused about Lawrence and certainly illegal substances. He was pretty straight edge in the early days. That sounds like someone else had that. And I have to say, £50 a week sounds really cheap. So I'm going to say that is false.
I think it is true. It's in the book,
okay.
so they're all in the book. Next one. Lawrence once had a girlfriend with a pet snake.
Well, they've all been true, so this one must be false. So, again, I do recall...
Too predictable.
Well, there are some... I say Lawrence's girlfriends, the stories about the girlfriends and the way they give each other's account are a very good part of that book. Simply on the grounds that they can't all be true, I'm going to have to say false to that, although it feels true.
False. But there is a very entertaining story about a pet monkey.
Ah, yes, right.
Which is in the book. So pet monkey is true. Pet snake is false.
So that book, I mean, just from those three questions, is filled with Bananarama, stalking, monkeys, illegal substances. It's got everything.
Joint rollers, all sorts. One more. Lawrence proposed an idea for an album, which was one side horror music and one side porn soundtrack. It's so obscure that could I have made that up?
Well, yes. I mean, it does sound very on brand in some ways, but I'm going to. I don't know the porn stuff. I'm going to have to say false to that.
It's in the book.
Oh,
it was an idea. It didn't come to fruition, but it
people
was
are
discussed.
going to come away with the conclusion I have not read this book, and that is
You read it back
incorrect.
in May, so you're 6 months since
Well,
you read it.
I read some part of it ahead of this podcast, but I didn't read those parts, obviously.
At the end of each episode, we each recommend something you've liked for a long time, or something you've recently discovered. Mark?
The best literary festival in the UK is the Larne Festival. It takes place in Larne, which is the birthplace of Dylan Thomas. It is run by the magnificent Richard Thomas, who is a massive hero. And that is on from the 28th to the 30th of March. I'll be going there. I don't know if it's sold out. It usually is. It's just amazing. And Lawrence and Will and Jeremy Deller are going to be there alongside John Shuttleworth and loads and loads of people. It's huge fun. Check out their website, just Larne Weekend. And if you can go, want to spend a early spring, late winter in Wales, it's well worth your time.
I'm going to recommend the Paul Kelly documentary, Lawrence of Belgravia. So if you have a BFI player subscription, you can watch this.
That's a very good recommendation. You know what? I have never seen that.
Yeah, it's on there. So Paul was with us last night. We are recording this ending the morning after our event last night with Lawrence and Will. And Paul was here last night, and I told him I watched it. And he described to me, so there's a shot at the end of Lawrence on a balcony in the tower block where he lives, and it pans out for 3 or 4 minutes all the way out. And I said to Paul, how did you film that? And he said, well, from the building I live in, which is 5 minutes away from where Lawrence lives. So from their building to his, they filmed this really long tracking shot. Really interesting.
I mean,
I thought it was a really complex procedure involving all sorts of things, but it was actually quite simple.
I mean, easier done now, because you can't watch any documentary or film where there aren't drone shots doing overheads and shots that would have been impossible without loads.
Because I was watching it from 2011, 2012, thinking this is too early for drones. How did they achieve this? So watch out for it when you watch it.
Well, I'm definitely going to watch that over Christmas. I don't have a BFI subscription. So,
you can just buy it as a one-off if need be.
Excellent. Well, I've got a smart telly that can do everything, so I'm going to give that a go. Thanks for that recommendation.
Will, what would you like to recommend?
I would like to recommend a book called Nico, Songs They Never Play on the Radio by James Young.
Fantastic book.
You know it. It's just brilliant. There's definite parallels with Lawrence. You know, it's Nico of the Velvet Underground in the 80s when no one really cares about her, and she's got a terrible heroin addiction, and she does this tour of Europe and Eastern Europe, which in the 80s was very, very difficult, you know, behind the Iron Curtain. And she's this amazing figure who's kind of tragic, kind of funny and sort of pathetic, but then you end up really admiring her and feeling a lot of affection for her too. And James Young was her keyboard player. He didn't really know anything about, he knew a bit about the Velvet Underground, but he wasn't trying to be a musician. He just finished at Oxford and he was planning to become an academic, and this is just in between. So it was a really interesting viewpoint of the kind of, you know, the outsider looking at the outsider. And I think it's just a brilliant, brilliant book, which I'd recommend anyone to read.
So, all that remains is to give a big thanks to Will Hodgkinson for his insights into Lawrence. And once again, to remind you to go out and get Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence, which is rightly everyone's book of the year, as well worth your time. And don't forget, we know a lot of you listen to this podcast, and we know far fewer of you have given us a rating and indeed have made any
the numbers
comments.
have ticked up a little since we started to hassle everyone about it.
Yeah, so we're going to carry on hassling.
We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing it.
I know at this point you've actually stopped listening to the podcast and moved on to the rest of this history, so this is pointless. But no, we're grateful for your support. We need that support to continue. And, you know, these things do take quite a bit of time and effort, even if it's only Simon's time and effort. If you want to slip him price of a coffee on Ko-Fi, I'm sure they'll appreciate it, especially at this Christmas time. So thanks very much to everyone who's listened, and we'll see you again soon. Many thanks.